Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find this show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. And, of course, if you are new to the show, there are lots of ways to listen to the show. Of course, here on AFR Live every Tuesday, also archived on AFR's websites. You can always listen to it on my website, also on TuneIn and Stitcher, and iTunes as well, of course YouTube, and also on Patreon. And if anybody wants to support the work that I do, then you can go to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond, and you can become a subscriber for as little as $1 a month. And of course, with that $1 donation, you get access to the bonus podcast. I did somehow make it in under the wire. The bonus podcast was posted on January 31st, so still in the month of January, albeit a little bit late. And it was an interesting episode. A lot of people seem to have enjoyed it. I talked, of course, about Chelsea Manning and her bizarre friendship, or I don't know quite what to make of it, but her bizarre connections with various figures on the alt-right movement, and we might even kind of touch on that a little bit later on today's episode. Quickly, I also just wanted to thank recent people for signing up to Patreon. So thank you, Stieg, Theodore, CT, and Ace Train. Thank you all so much for subscribing. I'm very excited about my guest for today. We are going to be speaking with Kevin Gosztola, who is the managing editor of Shadowproof.com, where he still publishes his daily column, The Dissenter. And I hope people will be familiar with The Dissenter, of course, from Fire Dog Lake, where Kevin wrote for many, many years. And Kevin is also the host of a weekly podcast, Unauthorized Disclosure, which I encourage the listeners to go and listen to, just maybe just after listening to our conversation today. But before we get started, Kevin Gosztola, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and Shadowproof?
Yeah, so I'm as you introduced me, I'm managing editor. I mostly cover whistleblowing stories and I suppose civil liberties issues. I like to track cases that are moving through the U.S. courts, whether they're involving the First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, the rights that we're supposed to have as Americans. And I like to keep people up to date on what's going on as far as government efforts to suppress dissent, or how people are exercising their rights and trying to expand their rights here in the country, in the United States. And so focus on those sorts of things, sometimes following developments that are U.S. military related, national security agency related. And so, lately I've chosen to specialize in the Reality Winner case, which we're going to be talking about on the show. And Shadowproof is a media organization that I co-founded with Brian Sonnenstein. He is someone who does a lot of work on U.S. prisons and mass incarceration. And so he and I run this organization where we really feel like what we'd like to do is, not only do we have it as one of the founding principles that we're going to go and pursue stories that are normally treated as off limits by establishment media or corporate press, however you want to refer to them. And we're going to chase those stories But we also want to give support to freelance journalists. We know that it's really difficult for people out there to find employment and jobs, and also to actually do meaningful work, because sometimes you'll get hired and people just want you to maybe do clickbait for the website. So we like to really, in the last few years that we've been operating, we started in 2015, moved on from Firedog Lake after that shut down, and then started the Shadowproof in 2015. We spent a lot developing how we can bring freelance journalists into our organization and give them support.
Excellent. And, if you go to shadowproof.com, right at the top, there's a little section for freelance submissions. And I definitely encourage people, if you're not already, following the work on shadowproof.com, I highly recommend it, especially given the sad state of the media, which I'm sure we will talk about a little bit later, Kevin, especially as it relates to the coverage of Reality Winner. But as we were saying, we're going to be talking about Reality Winner, who is, of course, an NSA whistleblower who leaked documents to the Intercept, which supposedly showed Russian state influence in the election through the hacking of voting machines and or the hacking of voting programs. And she is the first whistleblower to be prosecuted under the Trump administration. And back on episode 97 of the show, Tom Secker, Robbie Martin, and myself, we talked about this. And I think if you go back and listen to that, I think I was probably a little unfair to Reality Winner. And the more I've followed her case and the more I've followed your work on it, Kevin, I've begun to sort of see that there's a bit more complexity to all of this, and there's a bit more to Reality Winner. Of course, the media is sort of dubbed, her name is very strange, and she seems quote unquote strange to the media, so that the story has sort of taken on a mind of its own. But and apologies to the listeners, I am sick right now, so if you hear me sniffling or anything like that, that's why. But Kevin, give us a kind of a quick recap of the Reality Winner case, because I'm assuming most people have sort of forgot. I had kind of forgotten about Reality Winner until I started, checking out Shadowproof, because you've been writing quite a bit about her and about the uphill battle that she's facing. The way the government is sort of trying this case. But give us a recap again. Who is Reality Winner? What is she accused of doing? And what is, the sort of parameters of the case as they exist right now?
Reality Winner was a National Security Agency contractor. She's a linguist. She knows various languages like Pashto and Farsi. And not entirely sure what exactly she was using them for at the NSA, but she had the capability to, I know that she wanted to or aspired to be deployed as part of the U.S. Air Force and in the Middle East, and to assist with operations there. That's something that she had wanted to do, and she had seen this job in Augusta, Georgia as a sort of bridge towards having some kind of deployment outside of the United States. And so she came across this document that you were talking about as a top secret intelligence report. And I'm just going to refresh the memory of your listeners by reading the way that the Intercept introduced it. It was a Russian military they suggested that Russian military intelligence executed a cyber attack on at least one U.S. voting software supplier and sent spear phishing emails to more than 100 local election officials just days before last November's presidential election. And this was all according to the intelligence report that she allegedly disclosed. This report was dated May 5th, 2017. So it was fresh. When she provided it to the Intercept, it had been a matter of days, and maybe not even more than a couple weeks, that it had actually been in the system. And so she was arrested in June. We learned of her arrest almost simultaneously, almost around the same time that the Intercept published this report that they were reporting on. And she was arrested. The significance here we can get into further but the FBI sent at least a half dozen agents, if not more, to her home in Augusta. 2 agents she met first. She says they were armed. They asked to speak to her voluntarily. That's a loaded term there, but they asked, could we talk voluntarily? Also, they said they had a search warrant. And later, we can get into more details, but I'll just bring this up now that they suggested they had a search warrant for her person. And so, this is a serious matter at this point. She's not really sure what it's about, but if she really did leak this document to the Intercept, as seems to be the case according to the confession she made to these FBI agents, then in fact she knew that they were probably there at her home to ask her about. So she was taken to a back room in her home that she didn't really want to go to and be alone with FBI agents in, and they questioned her. Lasted for I think 20 or 30 minutes. At one point during this exchange, they suggest that she might be lying, or she might be going down a path where she's going to lie to the FBI, and that would be a bad choice. So it's not long if you read the transcript that she starts to go into details and suggest that she did provide this document to the Intercept. So then she goes outside and stands outside and is eventually arrested by female FBI agents who come and place her under arrest. So I raise all that because there's a big issue right now around whether she was Mirandized or read her rights, and there's a critical motion to suppress statements hearing coming on February 27th as a big potential turning point in her case. But again, continuing to talk about who she is and what happened. After that, she was put in jail. She was denied bail. She's been in pretrial detention since then, since June. And she's had her trial date moved twice. First time it was scheduled for October, and then now they're not going to make the current scheduled date in March, so she will be in jail potentially for well over a year before she finally gets to defend herself.
And Kevin, explain because there's a lot there, and I want to unpack probably more so in the second hour. I mean, this whole issue of what actually this FBI transcript, and did they Mirandize, or did they even have to Mirandize, or what's sort of going on there. But going back a little bit, because there's a couple things that I think again people will have sort of forgotten. One, you mentioned that we kind of knew about this. This article in the Intercept sort of coincided with, exactly with her being arrested. There's something to that, right? I mean, the Intercept cooperated with the government in sort of figuring that it was Winner who had given them these documents. Is that correct?
Well, what I think is going on here isn't that they cooperated as much as I think that there's something. I don't know that they cooperated, but there's certainly, in my opinion, some kind of recklessness going on the part of at least 2 of the reporters involved in the reporting of her the disclosure on the top secret report, because what people may not know, but I recognize because I covered CIA whistleblower John Kiriaku's case, is that there's actually a commonality between the reporters who worked on the story of that, the disclosure from Reality Winner, and also worked on John Kiriaku or allegedly had communications with him before he was eventually jailed and prosecuted under the Espionage Act, just like Reality Winner. So there's, I'll focus on Matthew Cole, because he worked on the story, and Matthew Cole is actually someone who was making overtures to John Kiriakou that he was writing a book on rendition and that he wanted to obtain information about he had like a name he wanted to confirm for the book, or he had details that he wanted for his book. And he never wrote this book. He never published any book about renditions. And it turned out he was actually working on behalf of a project that was trying to, I think, exonerate or help free prisoners from Guantanamo Bay prison, which not a bad thing to be doing, but also he wasn't representing. He misrepresented himself to John Kiriakou. And, in this case, it just is, it's just a suspect that someone who had, compromised, the security of one of their sources previously would also be involved in handling something like this.
And there's also because I remember this at the time, there was a whole issue about how that Reality Winner had printed out these documents on a Xerox machine, and that this is how they were able to figure out that it was her, right? I mean, isn't there there's some weird story behind that, or am I just sort of making that up?
I think you're right that it was mailed. I'll just refer people who are listening. I wrote about this. I took a bunch of notes about how this all played out initially. There's a post that I did that was notes on the Trump Justice Department's first leak prosecution. And I go into not only what she's accused of, which is violating the Espionage Act, but I go into how Richard Esposito is another reporter who was involved, and I go into all the things that are at issue here. Esposito was also involved in possibly exposing Kiriakou to the government for prosecution. And as far as what you're saying with the Xerox, I don't exactly remember addressing that earlier on, but I know that there were a lot of peculiarities in the way in which she handled herself, which, as you said at the top of the show, people wondered if they could support her. I think also the nature of what she was exposing has always been at issue in whether you decide to support Reality Winner. So I think that's actually a fair thing to go into and talk about right now. And I think I'll just share that I'm as skeptical of everything that the government has put forward about the entire Russia investigation, probably more so than the vast majority of the population. I just have not seen the proof that links Donald Trump and various other officials to the kind of collusion that everyone is trying to allege. I buy into the idea that there's evidence that lower ranking officials were involved in their own operations and that they were doing their own business dealings with people who have ties to the Russian government. And I buy into the fact that there's some level of quid pro quo that's going on and people might have wanted something to happen, but the sort of conspiracy that people are trying to concoct of Vladimir Putin having some role in installing President Donald Trump as our president is not something that I've ever bought into, especially because I understand the massive flaws of the campaign of Hillary Clinton and how, there are certain things that they did that set them up for failing in the race against Donald Trump. And we don't need to go off too far on that tangent, but I think it's important to just say that that's how I believe that's what I believe about the Russia investigation. And so I've had probably the same sorts of issues that you've had with how do you approach what was disclosed by Reality Winner? How do you take it seriously? Well, I think that it's probably true that there were hackers that were linked to Russia who were targeting our systems. And I'm willing to accept that as truth because I know that there are people from the United States government in the military or maybe affiliated with the NSA who have their own offensive cyber operations that are targeting other governments. So I know that there's a war. So I've never denied that Russia was in some way possibly trying to undermine our electoral process because I know that in the past we've actually tried to undermine the electoral processes of Russia. So if we accept all of that, then I think it's okay to recognize why Reality Winner wanted to make this disclosure. And there's actually a key exchange in the transcript with the FBI agents where they're talking to her and they say, it looks like you're just somebody who's politically frustrated with Donald Trump, and that you made a poor decision. And if that's the case, we just want to know. But it seems like you made a poor choice and you violated classified information. You released it because you were troubled. And she goes on to explain that the reason why she released this document is because she heard all of this discussion in the media about alleged Russian interference. And this the particular findings in this report were not part of the discussion. And she wondered why it wasn't out in the public. And she thought she wasn't compromising anything that sensitive because people were already talking about similar acts. And so this was just something that could add to the conversation. And so I think that regardless of whether you believe that the focus on Russian influence is worthwhile, you can still back her as a whistleblower because the motivation for releasing the document, whether it has as much value as she thought it had. It was a whistleblowing decision that she made. She wanted to release this report to improve our understanding. And it may not have the kind of significance that the disclosures, which were numerous, but the disclosures from Chelsea Manning had. They're not, there are numerous disclosures from Edward Snowden that made a huge impact. And you could take just one document from Edward Snowden and say, well, what she disclosed is so insignificant compared to even take one document from Edward Snowden. But I don't think it really matters because at the core of what she's doing, she's setting out to blow the whistle on something that she's seeing internally at risk to her job. And now she's in jail and she's being punished extremely harshly. And that's something that we all have to pay attention.
No, and I would just echo everything that Kevin just said there. I, of course, doubt pretty much all of at least the grand Russian interference conspiracy as, the Democratic leadership has sort of laid out. Like you, Kevin, and I've talked about this a million times on the show, I don't doubt that there was certainly wheeling and dealing going on. I mean, it's pretty obvious that there was amongst the sort of lower ranks of the Trump, incoming cabinet. Everyone seemed to be talking to Russians. I don't really even doubt that Donald Trump has had dealings with shady Russian. I assume if there is any sort of meat to this whole thing, it's probably very run-of-the-mill graft that Trump was, receiving bribes or payoffs. Maybe there's some money laundering, but not that, he's a long-time Russian sleeper that Putin, groomed since the mid-1990s when Trump first went over to Moscow for the Miss Universe contest. I don't believe any of that. But all that being said, I had similar reservations when Reality Winner came out, because of my sort of hesitant nature when it came to the whole Russian investigation. But as you said there, Kevin, and I think this is a really important part, and this is what I want to get into with right now, is that this is like a drop in the bucket. Like Reality Winner even says that. I think those exact words in the transcript. She's like, I didn't really think this was going to be that big a deal because this is nothing. This is one little tiny report out of many, many reports. And this is, like she says, it's a drop in the bucket compared to anything that's been leaked in recent time. So that's a one point to kind of keep there. The other thing, though, is that regardless if of the subject matter or the contents of what she was leaking. Like you said, she is a whistleblower attempting to blow the whistle on government corruption, government negligence and stuff. And the really scary thing that I want to get your take on right now, Kevin, is the way in which he's being prosecuted. The way, we've seen since people like Thomas Drake and Bill Binney, John Kiriakou, Chelsea Manning, and so on and so on. We've seen whistleblowers, being, I don't know. I mean, this aggressiveness with which they're prosecuted, and Reality Winner is like even more so, if you can imagine that. And I want to just talk a little bit about, Reality Winner is accused of violating the 793E provision of the Espionage Act. And under the government's sort of expansive interpretation of this, they don't really need to prove much of anything. Essentially all they need to present in court is that Winner had unauthorized possession of a document that was related to national defense, whatever the hell that means, and that she willfully communicated or delivered or transmitted the document to a person not entitled to receive it. So, I mean, break that down, Kevin, because essentially, this is such a broad interpretation. They don't have to prove that there was any threat to national security. They don't have to prove that this was, dangerous or that it aided, an enemy nation or something like that. All they really have to prove is that Reality Winner had a document and gave it to, because this is, and the way I viewed this, this is essentially, you wouldn't be able to leak anything. They could use this interpretation of the Espionage Act to, lock up almost anybody involved in this field. Journalists. What if she could have given this document to another government employee, even someone within the NSA, and technically they could have, tried her, based on the fact that she had unauthorized possession of a document related to national defense, and she gave it to someone not entitled to receive it. So am I wrong on that, Kevin, or is this a very sort of scary new step in the way that whistleblowers are going to be prosecuted?
It's definitely alarming, and everyone who learns about the aspects of Reality Winner's case and how she's being prosecuted should feel shock and awe, especially at the vengeful nature in which the prosecutors for the Trump administration are pursuing her. However, what must be made clear is that President Barack Obama's Justice Department enabled the Trump administration to take these steps that we're going to be seeing, probably not only with Reality Winner's case, but for whomever else is going to come forward and want to release documents. Because what they did is they made the Espionage Act and very deliberately, in the way that they pursued these cases, they made it into a strict liability offense. And it always had elements of that, where all you had to do is prove that you had that the person, the defendant, had released classified information without authorization, and once you prove that, that person was guilty and could be jailed or sentenced and fined, or however you wanted to punish them. But they take it a step further, because they've actually managed to discourage judges and convince them that knowledge and intent do not matter to the offense, which is really troubling, because if you think about any other cases, if you think of other crimes, like, let's say, burglary, like if you decide that you want to steal something and you had the intent to steal, you actually made that choice. You wanted to steal that document, or you wanted to, not document, but you wanted to steal a loaf of bread or something like that. You have the intention. You know that you're going to be stealing that bread. That happens. And so in that case, that's your motivation. You're doing something, and you know you're violating, and maybe you steal that loaf of bread because you're hungry, and that gets into a gray area now. Now you have motive issues. now you can talk about like how much do we punish that person? They don't have any food to eat, but they stole that loaf of bread. Well, in this case, you can't have that conversation because they say, okay, you took that document, you're guilty. We don't care why you took it. Maybe you wanted to show people that there was something corrupt that was being done, but then they make you then. Even if they entertain that conversation, which normally they wouldn't, they would then say, but did you do X, Y, and Z before you decided to take that document to the press? Not realizing that what you talk about in your question is if she takes this document and she says, this is shocking, I think people should be talking about it, and she walks it to a superior or she walks it to the Inspector General of the National Security Agency, then she might become a target herself, because someone's going to know that a low-level employee is concerned about what's in a document. And there are people who run the NSA who are aware of these sort of things and will take measures to control people. It happened to Thomas Drake. That's
right.
What we refer to as the NSA 4, these whistleblowers that revealed information about a private boondoggle sort of thing. It was called Thin Thread. It was a way of tracking and collecting intelligence. They blew a whistle about that. They ended up becoming targets for prosecution, particularly Thomas Drake did. And he was prosecuted for retaining classified information by the Obama Justice Department. And so I think, for a full breakdown of the law and how it has evolved, I wrote a post called Espionage Act and NSA Whistleblower Reality Winner's Uphill Struggle to Defend Herself earlier in January. And I broke it down because there's been cases all along in the last 30 or 40 years where Espionage Act law has been set. In the last 10 to 15 years with the Obama administration, we've had a huge uptick in arguments between defense attorneys and prosecutors over whether it's unconstitutionally vague or not in the way that it's being prosecuted. But ultimately, a lot of this all goes back to one case which people may not really know, but it's worth raising because a while back in the 80s there was a guy named Morrison. The Morrison case, Sterling Morrison, I think was his name.
Samuel Morrison, right?
Sorry, Samuel Morrison. Thank you for the correction. This was a highly influential case because he worked for a publication called Jane's Defense Weekly and disclosed the location of naval ships to this publication. It was a British military magazine, and he got no money for it. But he was convicted of violating the Espionage Act. And these were 3 photographs that were taken from a U.S. satellite, and they were of a Soviet aircraft carrier. And so he sent them to this publication, and that got him in trouble. And he attempted to challenge the way that the government was going about prosecuting him because he said it was unconstitutionally vague and overbroad, and that the law was only supposed to punish espionage in the classic sense. So this is important for people because usually you would think of espionage as spying on behalf of a foreign power, that
right.
you're actually working for another government or that you're working for another entity that might be an adversary to the U.S. government. Well, clearly in this case, Reality Winner has no connection to any people. She's not doing this on behalf of a foreign power or to advantage a foreign power, which is what the language is in the Espionage Act. And instead, Morrison was saying that he was just divulging information and that it wasn't to agents of a hostile foreign government, and that this law was not meant to punish leaking information to the press. And that's actually how I've always viewed it, because when you go back to the early 1900s when it first came to be, it existed as a thing to go after people for sedition. It was imagined as something that the government could use against communists, anarchists, socialists. It was imagined as a way to, I think it fueled the early stages of McCarthyism. It was a way to go after people who were engaged in dissent. And so in this case, I guess it's not so entirely stunning that now our government has resurrected it and is using it for the 21st century age dissenters, the whistleblowers within our U.S. government agencies. But back then, you were alleging that the people who you were prosecuting under the Espionage Act had connections to the Soviet government or had connections to these other fascist or communist regimes, and that was a problem. And so then they were brought before a court of law, and I guess in some cases they even eventually were deported. And so that was how that was handled. And then there really weren't any cases back then where it involved people providing information to a newspaper or a media outlet. And so now currently we've seen quite an advancement of the way they work Espionage Act law, to where you're actually going after people who want to reveal information that they believe is in the public interest, and there's no mechanism for them to come into a courtroom and argue that they had whistleblower intentions when they disclosed their documents. That's the way it was for Chelsea Manning. It's the way it is for Edward Snowden and why he chooses to remain in Russia. And so with Reality Winner, when she finally gets a chance at a trial, she now is able to defend herself, but she has this obstacle of, to what extent can I defend myself? What can I talk about? And when I want to talk about why I released this document on the alleged Russian interference in election infrastructure.
Mm. Oh, and there's so much to sort of pick apart there, Kevin. I mean, one thing, the Morrison case is so bizarre because, as you were just sort of saying, he was leaking photos of a Soviet aircraft carrier, and Samuel Morrison's whole thing was, well, I was only doing this to warn Americans. I mean, it's not as if he was leaking. Now, if he leaked U.S. Photos of U.S. aircraft carriers to the Soviets, okay, as a civilian naval, analyst, I can see him going to jail for that. But this is, again, him warning about the threats of the Soviets, yet he's a key, so it really kind of comes down to it's actually leaking. It's not really about espionage. It's really about revealing any information. Again, Reality Winner is accused of revealing just this one little tiny, more or less insignificant document, which, again, if true, is a pretty, it's a crime, it's a serious thing if the Russians were and I would imagine they probably are. I mean, we do the same thing to them, interfering with our electoral system and stuff. But, it's sort of like the level to which that's gone. I mean, people may or may not be aware of right now, Jerry Chung Xing Li is he's a former CIA officer who was recently arrested for violating the Espionage Act, and I would assume nobody actually knows anything about this guy, who apparently for years was leaking information to the Chinese intelligence. And it's like when we have those sort of examples, they're sort of hushed up. It's only going to be a few sort of intelligence-themed news outlets that are going to cover stories like that. Whereas a leaker, someone that's blowing the whistle on something, it does get some sort of a publicity, like Reality Winner. And that case is then so warped, to the point where, now it's like Reality Winner is a traitor. She's just the worst person imaginable. She's basically guilty, in the minds of everybody. Or she's a sort of political hack who just did this because she hated Trump or something. Quickly, one other thing, Kevin, because you talk about, along with Samuel Morris, talk a little bit about Stephen Kim, because he's another whistleblower, and a little bit more recently, but a similar thing as well, right? Where they were essentially, criminalizing him from just sort of leaking information. It's not really even about, who he was spying on, right?
Yeah, so Stephen Kim revealed some information to, I think it was actually, it was a Fox News reporter. It was James Rosen. This guy's actually notable because there was a whole uproar when it was found that Barack Obama and then the Justice Department, or not Barack Obama, but the Justice Department had been targeting him as a reporter, just his communications when they were prosecuting this case. And so Kim pled guilty to violating the Espionage Act. He essentially revealed some information about what the U.S. may or may not have known about North Korea's nuclear program. And what's significant with Stephen Kim is that when he goes into court and he argues, as a lot of defense attorneys do, that the Espionage Act is being prosecuted unconstitutionally, it's vague, it's overbroad. This is a fairly standard thing that a lot of defense attorneys do, and I think it's well worth it because, depending on what kind of judge you get and the current political climate and the way things are going, you might find maybe part of it carries some resonance. And so this judge, her name's Colleen Kolar-Kotelly, actually ends up lowering what the government has to do in order to prove that the information disclosed damaged U.S. national security or provided advantage to a foreign power. She references the Morrison case. I'll just read the quote that she says. In cases like this, which involve the alleged unauthorized disclosure of classified information, the Morrison approach invites the jury to second-guess the classification of the information. So one of the things here at issue was and the government has done this very successfully, and they did it to some extent in Chelsea Manning's trial. They probably would be able to do this very well if Edward Snowden was put on trial here. They don't want to talk about the information and whether its disclosure could harm or damage the United States because they know that that's possibly something that if you have a jury and they're listening to that conversation, they may start to be persuaded by the defense attorneys. So they don't want to debate the nature of the classified information and whether it actually can do damage to national security. And so what they do is you get someone like this judge on their side and you say, we don't have to prove whether that information actually would do damage to national security. It's beside the point. Because the information was disclosed, it was classified. The fact that it's classified meant that we already made a determination that it would violate national security. And right. So you don't question our authorities and trust that just the mere fact that it's classified top secret was enough to give her notice that Reality Winner should have known if you release this document, bad things could happen. And so in that case, we can prosecute her to the fullest extent possible and put her in jail for a few years for releasing this report.
Right, and it bars a whistleblower from having any sort of argument about why they were doing this. Because it basically, like you said, it's just sort of you knew you were doing the wrong thing and that's it. It doesn't matter what's in the document. It doesn't matter why you were blowing the whistle on this. I mean, you can imagine a case where, I don't know, God forbid that, they're blowing the whistle on some really sort of horrible government program, I don't know, of like, they kind of did, that's like with, John Kiriakou. I mean, this is talking about torture. That wasn't really sort of allowed to, that didn't really matter. The point is that he leaked, he revealed documents to people he shouldn't have. Kevin, do you see this? I mean, like I said, I want to get into a little bit more about the specifics of the case and particularly if Winner's rights were violated. But do you see this as just sort of the latest in a series of steps by the judicial system and by the government to just sort of silence any and all whistleblower dissent? Because, I mean, surely if they convict Winner, which I unfortunately see as a pretty high possibility, would anyone ever leak, after that? I mean, I'm sure people will, but I mean, it seems sort of scary. I mean, especially to the point where they don't have to prove really much of anything with Winner. I mean, is this the trajectory?
Well, I think that everything that had happened with Barack Obama is terribly ominous for the United States, given that the current president is Donald Trump. Because he is so offended by people who speak out against him. We already hear him talking about things that I mostly just shrug off and ignore, statements about the Russia investigation that are made by Democrats, and he sees those statements by elected political officials as treasonous, or at least he's willing to call them that before his base and get them upset by using the word treasonous. And so I think that he's had a very vengeful tone in the way that he's spoken about leakers. Also, it's really troubling to me that the person who runs the Justice Department is Jeff Sessions, because he's so offended by leaks. He always has despised leaks. He's always been one of the most extreme politicians when it comes to how he wants to control leaks. He fully backs the idea that I think the United States should have their own Official Secrets Act, which is basically a kind of bar on leaking to the press. They have that in the United Kingdom. They're not as free as we are because we don't have that kind of a law on our books here in the United States. The de facto law that they're using is the Espionage Act as an official secrets law, but that's actually weaker than just a straight up law that says leaking, no matter what, is an offense, which we don't have yet. So you just have people to make boisterous and belligerent arguments and to hurl vitriol at people who decide to leak. And I think that's huge issue that makes Reality Winner's prosecution at this current moment a one where she's really going to have a lot of trouble trying to avoid additional jail time or trying to avoid a conviction. She's also being tried in Augusta, and I'm still learning a lot about Augusta, and this is something that I'll probably do some more reporting on in the future, especially as I'm going to be covering this hearing on February 27th, so it'll be my first time being in Augusta, Georgia. But what I've come to learn, speaking to an activist there, is that there's a whole like cyber command down in Augusta, and it sounds to me that this is one of those towns where you've really got people tied into the security apparatus or the military industrial complex. It sounds like this is also a place where former security officials or people who had worked for security agencies go to retire. It kind of sounds like it has some of the hallmarks of like Alexandria, Virginia, where there's a lot of like CIA or NSA types that live there. And so they hate Reality Winner, and the jury pool, I can't imagine who she's going to get who's going to hear this case and how they're going to view what she did. And they're already having a really difficult time when they bring her case before judges. Twice now they've had a total of 4 judges basically agree that it is plausible and probable that she hates America and might try to flee the country because she does not trust that the United States government can prosecute her. And so I don't know how she can get fair justice.
No, and you just posted an article very recently. Appeals court agrees Reality Winner hates America, so she will remain in pretrial detention. Let's just touch on that a minute, because this is so insane, the logic behind this. Because of silly stuff she said online. I just really don't buy any of the, especially if you when we talk about the transcript, between her and these FBI agents, she's making jokes throughout the she sounds like a really fun person funny person to be around. But she made some stupid comments, but nothing that I don't know, I would assume lots of people before haven't said. But they've interpreted this to the most like extreme level that she hates America. That's why she wanted to blow the whistle on Russians interfering with America's electoral system. Yet, that's what this sort of like Alice in Wonderland aspect to this. They paint her as like a, classic, Soviet, master spy who wants to, I don't know, destroy. I mean, they quote because she said she hated capitalism and America's destruction of the environment, that she's anti-American. I mean, that's basically like a thought crime, right? I mean, I don't understand how so anyone that disagrees with capitalism or pollution is anti-American. And then they say that because she wanted to deploy to places like Kurdistan, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Jordan, and the Palestinian territories, that makes her a flight risk. To what? To flee to, basically a bunch of American proxies and colonies? I mean, how would that even work? She's going to flee to Kurdistan with, the largest U.S. military presence in all of Iraq. Just explain a little bit about that, Kevin, because it's just so utterly ridiculous, this notion that she is this sort of anti-American WikiLeaks supporter or something like that.
It's super ridiculous, and it's both tragedy and farce. Like so much of what we confront with our U.S. government, there's both that which seems to make me think of something darkly humorous, and then at the same time, this is really sad because this is what you're doing to a person. Under this pretense, this is what they're using to keep her in jail for another 5, 6, 7 months before she finally gets a trial. And these statements, I mean, I could read one of them off to you just because, they seize on a text message that was sent in February 2017 about how she's going to have to take a polygraph exam. This is something that happens to everyone who wants a security clearance. If you're working for a U.S. security agency or if you're working in the military, to get your clearance, you have to pass this exam. And she told her sister, I have to take a polygraph where they're going to ask if I've ever plotted against the government. Gonna fail. Look, I only say I hate America like 3 times a day. I'm no radical. It's mostly just about Americans' obsession with air conditioning.
Yeah.
She's joking.
Clearly. She's joking.
This is a joke. And to read into that and suggest that, first off, this represents some intent to potentially act out some violence is incredible. But then also to write off all of the things. It's amazing that these comments and all this stuff, the alleged sympathy for Snowden and Julian Assange, that all of this then outweighs automatically the time in the Air Force, anything that she does for the Peace Corps, Doctors Without Borders, the fact that she's a good family, she doesn't have any criminal record prior to this, the likelihood that she is going to be bailed and then go out and live somewhere, probably with her parents, and then, find some way that she can commit more crimes against the U.S. government is pretty close to nil. There's not much evidence in her record that suggests that she's going to continue to engage in this conduct. Let's say, let's just pretend that like the prosecutors are justified in what they're doing. There isn't a lot of evidence that they've got a repeat offender on their hands. We're not talking about some kind of a drug dealer, or we're not talking about some other kind of a person where it's really easy to have recidivism happen. She's not going to have access to classified information. She can't release more documents. And so that's incredible. But then these appeals court judges that reviewed her case, they twist everything into the worst possible way. And this is just, I find this amazing. This is what I included in my piece. I'll read it for you.
Oh, well, we're at the break, Kevin, but we'll continue the conversation in the second hour with Kevin Gosztola of Shadowproof.com. We're talking all about reality winners, so stay tuned.
I like very much radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
Simply Clean Foods is dedicated to providing the best quality food you can buy next to fresh from a farmer's market. Our stringent quality controls and absolute zero GMOs plus testing for heavy metals makes us unique in the storable foods market. Our line of fruits, vegetables, and meats are suitable for everyday use, and you won't have to worry about throwing away valuable groceries ever again. Take out the amount you need and reseal the package for use within the next 6 months. Simply Clean Foods' primary focus is to bring clean food to people all around the world and change the way we look at freeze-dried food in our daily cooking. Go to simplycleanfoods.net. That's www.simplycleanfoods.net today.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
American Survival Wholesale is a proud sponsor of the American Freedom Radio. And when you purchase quality products from AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, you help support this program. Our quality non-GMO foods do not contain MSG, high fructose corn syrup, or heavy metals. At American Survival Wholesale, you can choose from over 8,000 quality products, including self-defense weapons, bug-out bags, and long-term storable food at wholesale prices. We also have custom food packs available, including gluten-free, dairy-free, and vegetarian packs. If we don't have it, you don't need it. American Survival Wholesale is a veteran-owned and operated company which also supports our veterans in need, and we are very active in disaster relief. If you would like to become a distributor, please email us at bugoutamerica@usa.com or call 818-720-0759. We offer free consultations to answer all your questions. Do it today while things are calm. That's AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com.
I don't like words that hide the truth. I don't like words that conceal reality. I don't like euphemisms. And American English is loaded with euphemisms. Because Americans have a lot of trouble dealing with reality. Americans have trouble facing the truth. So they invent a kind of a soft language to protect themselves from it. I'll give you an example of that. When I was a little kid, if I got sick, they wanted me to go to the hospital and see the doctor. Now they want me to go to a health maintenance organization. Smug, greedy, well-fed white people have invented a language to conceal their sins. It's as simple as that. The CIA doesn't kill anybody anymore. They neutralize people. The government doesn't lie. It engages in disinformation. Israeli murderers are called commandos. Arab commandos are called terrorists. Contra killers are called freedom fighters. Well, if crime fighters fight crime and firefighters fight fire, what do freedom fighters fight? They never mention that part of it to us, do they? Never mention that part of it.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control is good. 5, right, copy. 3, 2, 1. Engage.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio. Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything: geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Come and to you live from New York City. Your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. If you are joining us here in the second hour, we have been speaking with Kevin Gosztola, the managing editor of Shadowproof.com, and we've been talking all about the Reality Winner case. But quickly, I just want to mention we've got an amazing new sponsor over at American Freedom Radio, Simply Clean Foods, which they produce non-GMO, dried all sorts of different, they've got dried peaches, bananas, strawberries, lots and lots of great stuff. Of course, all no GMOs and any of that. So if you go to AmericanFreedomRadio.com and if you just scroll down, we've got a great little banner, Simply Clean Foods, Simply Delicious. Highly encourage people to check that out. So grateful for a brand new sponsor on the show, for the whole network, excuse me. But anyway, Kevin, we had to cut you off there towards the end of the first hour, but we were talking about Reality Winner's alleged hatred of America and some of the ridiculous quotes by her that have been taken way out of context. Again, the fact, for instance, that she wanted to work in Afghanistan, which is partly why she learned Farsi, Dari, and Pashto. That somehow meant that she was going to flee to Afghanistan, again, an American colony controlled by the Pentagon and the CIA. I don't know how far she would have gotten, fleeing to Afghanistan or to Iraq or Jordan or Kurdistan or the West Bank or any of these places that they claimed. And we cut you off there, Kevin, but you were reading another sort of interesting statement by the courts as to why Reality Winner was a flight risk. Continue what you were saying.
Yeah. So as we recognize, this is showing her sense of humor. And they acknowledge that these statements, Miss Winner characterizes them as mere hyperbole, or that they reflect the weird sense of humor she shares with her sister. But that's not the only possible reading of her words, which is very ominous add-on there. And they continue and they say the statements, if viewed in a different light, suggest that Miss Winner may have a reason to flee, as she does not have any confidence in the government, which has accused her of serious criminal conduct. Which, consider that for a moment, that really what this comes down to is Reality Winner isn't being bailed out of jail because of the crime she allegedly committed. But she hasn't been convicted of this crime yet. So the prejudice that is being shown by these judges is really troubling, because to say, let's just take murder, or let's just take any other thing. Murder is a violent crime. Let's take a nonviolent crime. This is a nonviolent crime. And so if you take any nonviolent crimes, you wouldn't immediately assume that person committed those nonviolent crimes and then use that as justification to deny bail. You're looking at factors as to the way of life that they live, and whether those factors contribute to the idea that they're not going to show up for their trial. And in this case, there are no factors that I'm aware of that suggest Reality Winner wouldn't come to her trial.
No, and briefly, they make a big people should keep this in mind. And the appeals judges know this, that if she was granted bail, she would have to surrender her passport. She would have an ankle bracelet on, monitoring everywhere she goes, and her parents were going to they would put up their house as collateral for the bond. Okay, so if she fled the country, this woman who by all accounts has a close family ties, her parents would lose their house. Okay. And the government still sort of maintains this, that doesn't matter. You could take the ankle monitor off and you can still get out of the country without a passport. And, again, they make her out to, they make a mention of, she's got $30,000 in her savings account. I mean, that's enough money to, I guess, buy a fake passport and somehow clandestinely get out of the country. Again, the second she took off this bracelet, and her picture would be everywhere, every airport, every bus station, train station. She wouldn't get a few miles from her parents' house. But they maintain, again, that she's this master spy. And just quickly, Kevin, do you think this is just sort of part of the government's sort of myth making with Reality Winner? Again, that she is capable of doing these, this sort of conjures up the image, especially I would assume in Augusta, Georgia, where, she's going to be tried, that she is this sort of master criminal. Is there any credence to that idea?
It's really hard for me to discern what they may or may not be thinking. But let's just go down the route that maybe they do actually believe that she's some kind of like Pashto linguist super spy that has incredible capabilities that can embarrass the United States government. That she has like superhero qualities. Well, we know that when the U.S. government thought potentially Edward Snowden was hiding out on some diplomatic airplane or was possibly hightailing it on some jet and was trying to make it to Ecuador, that they were doing everything in their power to try and monitor and bring down these jets. We even had Bolivian President Evo Morales had to land so that they could inspect his jet. They wanted to do anything and everything they could to prevent Edward Snowden from getting to a place of asylum. So I think that there are people within our U.S. government who have these cartoonish ideas about what people like Reality Winner are capable of doing. And that's maybe not terribly unusual, because the analogy I would draw is also to like police. We've seen police who defend their actions after they've shot and killed someone.
Right.
They'll concoct these stories about the superhero capabilities of the person they were shooting in order to justify killing that person. And it's similar in this case, that in order to justify the prosecution and keeping her in jail, they're suggesting that alternatives to bail do not work for this particular person. These are things that have been proven time and time again with people who face incarceration, and they've been used constantly. But in her case, they have this prejudice toward her because she released classified information, and that's sacrilege. And so she is denied bail and kept in jail.
No, it's just, I don't know, mind-boggling. Again, I encourage people to read through your full article, because there's just they take some of these quotes so out of, especially ones where she says, like, she literally types in like "ha ha" to her sister. It's like clearly she's joking. But anyway. Moving on from that, there is a really kind of fascinating aspect of this case, and to me this is maybe the most sort of disturbing aspect to this, and maybe the most important. Before we were talking about the ways in which the government appears to be expanding the scope of the Espionage Act to basically create their own sort of official secrets act, like exists in the UK. And the part of this case that, again, is not gotten nearly enough attention, but you've written quite a lengthy article on this, again, that we will link up to in the show notes, sort of chronicling this, is the idea that the FBI violated Reality Winner's rights. And again, this is very disturbing because it could set a scary precedent for whistleblowers, and also just for sort of average people in general. Anyone that could be accused of a crime could be put under, could have this unfair pressure put on them. And essentially, part of the government's explanation for this is that Reality Winner, the FBI didn't violate Reality Winner's rights. Instead, Reality Winner didn't ask for her rights. And that might sound a little bit odd, but Kevin, explain what is happening here. Because, again, Reality Winner and her lawyers are accusing the FBI of essentially violating her civil rights and her civil liberties when they went to her house and began what they say was a voluntary interview. But again, if you listen to the read the transcript, it sounds very much like an interrogation. And Reality Winner has she filed it's not a motion, but she filed a statement talking about the experience, how she felt during this, how she didn't believe that she could leave on her own recognizance, that she didn't have the power to end this interview. And essentially the FBI is maintaining, well, of course she could. Or the government is maintaining, of course she could, But, you mentioned it a little bit earlier, but we had, 2 armed male FBI agents who approach her, followed by 8 more armed male FBI agents that begin to execute a search warrant. They take her into a what Reality Winner describes as a creepy and weird back room in her house, where they block the door, and they began talking to her, and like any good law enforcement, they make her feel at ease and then slowly kind of transition into the questioning. But explain, let's dive a little bit more into this interview/interrogation and why Reality Winner and her lawyers are accusing the FBI of violating her rights.
Yeah. So first, let's just we mentioned it in the first hour. Just want to repeat it again so people know, because it's really important. They managed to get the judge to agree to a hearing on this motion, which is really good for them because it's an opportunity to make these arguments that her rights were violated. If the judge had denied the request for a hearing, then the motion is dead, and they really are in trouble. And so they're going to have an opportunity to have this hearing on February 27th in Augusta and to make these arguments, which we'll get into now, which is that the FBI came in and they interviewed her, and during the process of this quote-unquote interview, or I'll call it an interrogation because that's really what it is, they're not offering her a job at the FBI. They're accusing her of a crime during the exchange. So she is in the back room, and they are talking to her, and about halfway through this interrogation, it's important to know that they do warn her that, as I said earlier when we first introduced the Reality Winner case, they do notify her that, you're talking around the edges, you're being oblique with us. We want you to know that if you are lying to the FBI, that is a really serious offense that we could punish you for, basically, is what they're insinuating. Or not insinuating. In some ways, they're very clear that if you were lying to the FBI, that is a problem. And so then she does come out and talk about this document that was provided to the Intercept. But over the course of this entire exchange, there isn't a moment where, as her defense says, the FBI ever Mirandized her, ever read her rights, ever notified her that she had a right to remain silent, that she could get an attorney, or that she could leave, that she could remove herself from the agent's presence if she did not want to speak to them, that she could go away. I don't know why she would leave her own home. We'll get into that later. But the idea here is that they never read her rights, and so that's a problem because at this point, she is in custody. There's really nowhere for her to go. I don't think anyone would think that she could go anywhere, although that is actually what the prosecutors are trying to argue to the judge. And against this motion, they're trying to maintain that she could have left whenever she wanted. But the FBI came, not just with those 2 agents, but other agents were there. They're rummaging through her home. Apparently they said something to her about having a search warrant for her person. They never executed that search warrant. She's in this back room. Well, so long as they have a search warrant that they haven't executed, do you really think you can leave? Because they have to still send somebody in. I presume that she probably thought, with her experience in security agency, that they're not going to have someone come touch me who's a man. They're going to send a woman over to run her hands up and down and do a pat down That's even what they offer with the TSA. So that, I mean, it's not
right.
Bad logic to think that these men who were interrogating her weren't going to be the ones patting me down. So they maintain that when they're trying to say that that when she provided the phone, that was when the search warrant was done. That's when it was executed. But then wouldn't that be a search warrant for the phone? Why would it be a search warrant for your person to get to her phone? It doesn't make any sense. And so... And
just to interrupt you quickly, don't they sort of dispute that later? Like the government claims there's another issue with the phone, right? That don't they claim that she didn't give the phone until later, even though clearly on the transcript she hands the phone to them like in the first 5 minutes of meeting them?
Yeah, that's true. That the phone was apparently taken care of quite early, and so the fact that this becomes an issue later doesn't make much sense. And so, as her defense even adds, where was Miss Winter supposed to go without her car or the ability to order alternative transportation from her phone? Even if there were locations to which Miss Winter could wander on foot, would any reasonable person believe in these circumstances that she could just walk out the door? Of course not.
Yeah.
And so, like she's there. They're standing in front of the door. She doesn't feel like she can leave that room. For what it's worth, she's detained at that moment. There isn't really anywhere that she is going to be able to go. They're controlling her movements. They tell her where to go and stand. There's something, it's not just that they need her to be in certain places so that people can execute the warrant. They're actually concerned about what she's going to do in her movements. And so they're having her go to specific locations around her house. At least that's the way I interpret it when I'm reading these filings and looking at the transcript, that they're very concerned about what she would be doing. At least and also in retrospect, that's the way I would treat it. If you, as a prosecutor, think she's a Pashto super spy who can flee the country, then you're also really concerned when you go to her house that she might
right.
take off and run. And so you're doing everything you can to control her movements inside her own home, which makes it custodial. And, as I go into in the article, there are several factors that you would consider. It's like where she's questioned, the length of the questioning, what she's saying. Does law enforcement have weapons? Well, they do. Whether they're holstered, they have them. Whether she was touched by law enforcement, is the language used to compel compliance? Well, I think so, that like during the course of the interrogation, you're talking, you don't like the direction that it's going. You suggest that if you lie to us, you're going to be in trouble. That, to me, if I was talking to an FBI agent, would escalate the situation significantly. The FBI agents just put me on notice that, they're not here at my home just to talk about what's happening at the office of one of the FBI branches. They think that I'm implicated in something specifically, and they want to know. There's something serious that they want to know from me. So I don't think, that's one factor. Then whether she was advised she was free to leave, at no point does anybody from the FBI say, if you would like to go, you can go. We'll just execute the search warrant, and then you can come back to your home or whatever. I mean, again, this still sounds really strange, because who leaves their home while the FBI agents are rummaging through your house? And
where is she supposed to go without her car keys or her phone?
Yeah, and law enforcement ever restrain her? Well, no, not there weren't any handcuffs used, but she is being told where to sit. She's being told what room to be in. So they are to some extent restraining her. Is she released after questioning? Yes and no. I mean, she has a period of time where there aren't any agents talking to her, but is that enough to be released after questioning? I think that's where you get down to going into the nitty-gritty details of the law. And she's never, released from this situation. I think what's interesting is they probably made a huge mistake in not breaking up what's going on here. So they could have executed these search warrants and looked for all of the things inside of her home that they wanted to find, or gone through all the places in their home that they wanted to search, and then those agents could have left. And you could have kept her under surveillance, and those agents could have just monitored her because they clearly have the jurisdiction or the authority to follow her. They believe she committed a crime. So they could have just pulled back. Now she thinks, I did something wrong, but who knows what she would do, how she would act. Maybe she would try to flee or run. Well, the agents would be monitoring her, so they could just chase her down if she did try to get away. But then you come back hours later and you arrest her. Because then if you do that, you can actually make the case that you never had her under custodial, you never had her in custody. But in this case, it's like one whole thing. It's one whole series of events in one time frame. The warrant is executed, and then they interrogate her, and then moments after, there are agents that come and they place her under arrest.
Well, and so that raises a couple of questions right there, Kevin. One is, quickly, did they even find anything from the search warrant? I assume they took some stuff, but was any of it relevant to their investigation? Because as she admits in this interrogation interview, however you want to phrase it, that she printed out the document, she put it allegedly in her pantyhose, and walked out, amazing security at these NSA facilities, and then she mailed it to the Intercept. So, did they even find anything from the search warrant? And then the second thing is, again, as you said, they execute a search warrant where clearly no one is just going to be like, oh, okay, the FBI is going through everything in my house. She also has a dog and a cat. She's just going to leave those there and walk away. And then when this is done, I guess it's an hour or so later, she is then arrested. So if she had left, would they have arrested her? Or which I guess sort of begs the question that I want you to get into, Kevin. Was she basically always under arrest throughout this whole thing?
And I think that's the argument of the defense, is that she was under arrest the moment that this whole process started. The way she felt, she's being told what to do. They're using coercion in order to control her. Sorry, refresh my memory. What you were asking me about?
Well, did they find anything in the search warrant?
Oh, yeah. So I was going to say they didn't find anything on her phone, but they did find those text messages. We know because they're used in order to keep her from being bailed out of jail. That's where you get the exchanges probably between her sister and herself. The weird sense of humor that is going on, or the delightful sense of humor, however you feel about it. And, obviously the appeals court judges don't seem to find it funny, but, the fact is that's what they found. They didn't find any, classified documents, and, to the extent that they took her electronic devices like a computer and everything else, as far as I know, they didn't find any other things, because those would have probably been additional charges. She just has the Espionage Act related offenses related to the one document. So no, I don't think there was any more found. But again, it's just probably dotting I's, crossing T's to go in there and just make sure that a person didn't have any other government documents.
And then getting back to the sort of second part of this whole issue is, again, if she was free to leave, would they? What would have happened? Again, she could have left, and what? She could have gone anywhere she wanted if she wasn't under arrest. What if she left the state? But at the end of this, after this, they go all through her house. And keep in mind too, at this point, before she's arrested, the FBI agents tell her to go into like the fenced in area where her dog is. So then she's waiting there for like, I don't know how long, a half an hour or something. And then 2 female agents appear and then they arrest her. So, and this is after, Reality doesn't she doesn't ask if I'm under arrest. She says, am I going to jail? And maybe you can talk about this, Kevin, because then the FBI says, oh, well, we don't know. I'm not sure yet. I have to make some phone calls. Explain this exchange, because this is another sort of interesting, and I'm sure they'll argue, well, she didn't technically ask if she was under arrest.
Yeah, so maintaining an air of uncertainty is something that can help her, because doing that can actually lead to the kinds of rights violations that Miranda is supposed to prevent. So if you leave it up in the air as to whether somebody is going to be placed under arrest, then you can control that person, or you can manipulate them to do what you want them to do, which is, as far as I'm concerned, a violation of your rights. And so they wouldn't tell her, even though they clearly know. I mean, they're there looking into her because she released this document. And so neither of those FBI agents should be able to look a courtroom and say, we weren't going to arrest her. We just came there to execute this warrant. We didn't know if she was going to be prosecuted for this. I mean, all this stuff is already drafted and drawn up and ready to be trotted out. And so, yeah, they're probably already ready to initiate the first phase of the prosecution. And that's really what we're seeing. I mean, the search warrant being executed, like, they're building a case against her, and the interrogation, they're building a case against her. They've managed to get her to talk to them. They're probably extraordinarily happy that she talked to them, because that makes their work easier. They're not going to have to go back and just use computer forensics and argue in a somewhat mundane sense how they can tell that the leak actually happened. Right. They're not going to have to bring out just names and dates of phone calls and put out like email messages and show when like the Xerox was used, and
right.
That can be boring to the jury. That can be really boring to a jury to follow, and you have to bring witnesses in, and they explain, I'm an expert on a Xerox machine, I'm able to read, blah, 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 and it's really boring. I had to listen to a ton of that crap while I was following the Chelsea Manning court-martial, and a jury can get really bored. But in this case, they managed to get what they believe is a confession, and that can be really powerful and influential to a jury. It'd be really hard, I think, at this moment with what she said to FBI agents for the defense to argue that she didn't do it, or that she did do it, but she doesn't deserve to be punished for it the way that the prosecutors are trying to do. And so they're trying to suppress these statements understandably. And I want to just bring up something because for people who are wondering, like, how have they handled this in the past? I didn't put this in my article, but I think since we've been talking about this for a long time and in very detailed conversation, you might be interested that in their filing, the defense noted a case called United States v. Craighead. It was before the Ninth Circuit, and it involved Miranda. And the case that they had here, this Craighead case, they say is very, very similar to what happened to Reality Winner. And in her case, they found that this individual, the suspect, was in custody, and so statements were suppressed in this case. Now, like a lot of things I like to say, I don't know how familiar you are as far as like civil liberties cases go, but there are a lot of times that you find that child pornography cases are the ones that have the most grotesque civil liberties violations because people think you can get away with whatever with these people. And it's not a mystery. You know, we think that they're vile people for what they've done. But there are a lot of cases where, you know, you've had defense attorneys push back and very convincingly show that rights were violated. In this case, 8 law enforcement officers went to the residency of this child pornography suspect. The agents asked to speak with him. They said that he was not under arrest, that any statement he might make would be voluntary. He wouldn't be arrested that day regardless of the information provided. He was free to leave. They escorted back to a storage room at the back of his house, which I think is important because it's very similar to what happened with Reality Winner. She got escorted to a room at the back of her house. They interviewed the suspect for about 20 to 30 minutes. Again, similar. They interrogated Reality Winner for about 20 minutes. After applying many of the above listed factors, the Ninth Circuit found that the suspect's interrogation was custodial because they were in a police-dominated atmosphere and that a large number of armed law enforcement officers would have made this person believe that they were not free to leave where they were. And so, in a sense, what happened was the statements were suppressed. And again, as they go through the similarities here, like Winner, the suspect had his home raided by law enforcement agents. Like Winner, the child pornography suspect was not handcuffed, so it didn't matter that that he wasn't in handcuffs. Shouldn't matter that Reality Winner wasn't in handcuffs. The suspect in Craighead was interrogated in a back room, as we talked about, and again, the interrogation was relatively brief. And in fact, this just seems to me pretty cut and dry. However, I know that there will be some gymnastics that the prosecutors will pull to try to get around having to deal with losing their confession, which I think they were probably proud to have. It's an open and shut prosecution if you have this confession from her.
Oh, totally. And I mean, I'm sure they'll go through whatever to explain that. But, unlike in the you said Craighead case, I don't believe in the transcript they ever told Winner that she could leave. I know that they said this is voluntary. We just want to talk to you. But I don't recall them ever saying that at any point in time you can end this. You're not under, they never said you're not under arrest. They just said we want to, I remember they kept just repeating, we have a search warrant. Did we tell you about the search warrant? Which again seemed to me, looking, from the outside looking in, as some sort of a police or interrogation tactic that they keep reiterating. There's a search warrant. There's 8 men that are going through your house right now for this search warrant. No, we just want to talk to you voluntarily. And then of course they don't even really get to the crux of their, they spend, the first half or 3/4 of the interview, they talk about everything but what she's accused of. I mean, they talk about her trip to Belize, her pink AR-15, the weird, stuff with her dog over and over again, all sorts of benign, silly little things. And then they eventually get to what they're after. But, at no point in there, I don't recall them ever sort of saying, you can leave or stop this interview at any point, or you can call for a lawyer. They never really say that. So, and this is the weird thing. I mean, is that it seems as if the prosecution and the FBI is sort of like want it both ways. They're saying that this is that this was all sort of voluntary and whatnot. But at the same time, they're also sort of saying, well, but she could have ended this whenever she wanted. How would she know that if they never really told her that? And again, anyone that's sort of questioning this or thinks, oh, well, if you had, what was this, Kevin? Maybe almost 10 FBI agents going through your house. You're in a closed room. I mean, the door is not physically closed all the way, but it is almost closed all the way. And the 2 of them are standing in front of there. They've got guns. They've got a search warrant in your house. You don't have keys or a phone. Would you honestly be like, excuse me, I want you to leave, or I want to leave? It's not going to happen. And then, on top of that, she is arrested after that. I mean, explain how that works, Kevin. I mean, clearly these FBI guys knew that she was going to be arrested. And how does that work in a let's say just not in a whistleblower case, but let's say any other criminal case. If they're executing a search warrant, they're asking you questions, and then you're immediately arrested. I mean, does Miranda apply during that?
And the law would say that if they're going to arrest you, if they're taking you into custody and they're talking to you in that way, that they probably should read you your rights, because, you know, I think I can even think of police procedural shows, popular ones like Law and Order, where the police enter the home, the suspect is there, they start rummaging through the home, right away they start saying you're under arrest, and they walk the guy out of the home and they arrest them while the search is happening. I've seen those things happen simultaneously. Yeah. So, you know, to answer your question, I think that is a huge issue that she's being arrested right after the interrogation. But I want to go back to what you were really pointing out, because I didn't say it clearly. And this was the next thing that the defense filing got into. It was exactly what you were talking about when comparing this child pornography suspect's case, which was like 10 or 15 years ago, to what's happening now with Reality Winner, because being told that this suspect was free to leave, you know, that suspect would have been under that sort of thing, saying that that person was not going to be arrested that day. That sort of thing actually counseled against finding that that person was in custody, that they were under arrest. And in fact, it didn't matter. Those things being told, there were still enough elements that made it so that person was able to have statements suppressed, that suspect.
Right.
Now, in Winner's case, she has more evidence than that case to argue that she was under arrest and had her rights violated because she was not Mirandized. She has more evidence than that case that is a kind of precedent. And so I think that what you see here is you got a pretty solid argument that her rights were violated. Now, there are several things that the government's trying. They're trying to rewrite the chain of events, the sequence of events that took place in her home. We're probably going to go over those ad nauseum during the motion to suppress hearing. The narrative as to what happened. I'm sure the defense has their own. We've already talked about it. The government has their own. And so reconciling those is going to be really difficult for a judge, I imagine, but ultimately what it should come down to is the law. And if you can pinpoint these factors which you've talked about, what makes it so you have to be read your rights. The moment that she is in a police-dominated atmosphere, as I understand it, she's supposed to be notified of her rights because she's lost her control, she has lost her freedom, and she deserves to be put on notice that she's going to be arrested for a crime.
Also, let's keep in mind, too, again, both in Winner's case and in the Craighead, the child pornographer case, they had to know that the law enforcement was onto them. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't just like a mistaken identity or an honest mistake. Now, according to Winner, she kind of, later on in the transcript when she's asked about she thought maybe that they were coming to look at the apartment or the house because she was still trying to rent it out. Then she says, maybe it was part of like security clearance for this job, and but I'm sure she knew from the beginning the FBI is executing a search warrant. The jig is up. The same with this child pornographer. I mean, these guys are not just there to, just chat him up and talk about, weather and sports. So again, if you are, even though you supposedly have the right to kick these people out or to leave, who's going to do that? If you're aware that you've broken the law in some way. It's only going to make you look more guilty or something like that. And clearly, if this is all hypothetical, but I don't think the FBI would have let her leave if she asked to leave. I mean, do you, Kevin?
No, there's no way that they're going to let her leave if she says, I'd like to leave right now.
Right. I mean, it's laughable. There's no way around that. And another quick thing on this whole issue, because obviously this could set a precedent for whistleblowers and whistleblowing cases and stuff, and particularly the powers of the FBI. But could a case like this, let's say the judge rules in favor of the FBI. A case like this could trickle down into anything, right? I mean, it could be the most, it could be the local sheriff's office in some little hick town out in the middle of nowhere, right? I mean, they could still cite the, U.S. versus Winner as an example of, well, it was totally fine that we never really read them their rights or anything like that because they weren't technically, under arrest or anything like. I mean, that could happen, right, Kevin?
Yeah, it could be like what we talked about in the first hour with Stephen Kim's case, where now the bar for arguing violation of the Espionage Act was lowered, where they didn't have to talk about intent or knowledge. Now, if you want to get statements in that were, you think, a confession or were incriminating and you got them and you didn't Mirandize that suspect, then maybe you could use Reality Winner's case and say, look at that case, compare it to this. We had the authority to do what we did and wait, basically wait to read her rights or to wait to arrest her, to collect information before we arrested her.
And also just on that matter, I mean, do you think that, again, we're totally speculating here, but do you think that the defense has a shot of convincing a judge of this? I mean, to me, and I was sort of in the dark about it. I remember reading the transcript or parts of it at the time when it was first released, and I guess it had never really occurred to me that they had never read her rights or anything like that. But of now on retrospect, I mean, it seems totally clear that they violated, all of her civil liberties. But given that it's a whistleblower, given that it's Reality Winner, do you think the defense has a shot of convincing a judge to suppress this?
I'm skeptical, but that's probably why I think it's even more important for me to go cover this hearing when it happens on February 27th, because I'm really concerned about the outcome. Let's just consider in our in-depth conversation what happens if they don't win this motion.
Right.
The whole trajectory of this, as far as being able to challenge the prosecution, is exceptionally difficult. I think that she would want to take a plea deal, but at the moment it seems like the government might not want to give her a plea deal because what does she have to bargain over? And maybe they could say, we'll retract our motion to suppress statements if you will give us a sentence of only, let's say 20 months or something like that. And she already has time served to her advantage, so she would be serving less than 20 months. And also you don't actually ever serve your full sentence. You get out and then you have 3 months where you're in a halfway house and then you're moved on to supervised release. So, which is what I learned covering John Kiriaku's case. So, they could do that. They could bargain. They could get a plea, but it seems like if they lose, not only do they not have any way to bargain and get a good plea deal, but they also are now at a supreme disadvantage, because when you start the trial, when it all begins, whenever it happens, if say it happens in October this year, then they have to overcome the fact that they have these statements where she basically admits to doing what she did. And we already have talked about how in a trial you can't justify the act. You can't argue that it was a whistleblower intentions or that you had good motives. The government, if they win the motion to suppress statements, will probably take the next step of targeting her whistleblower. They'll take the step of trying to bar or prohibit her from talking about why she wanted to do it, but bringing up the idea that she's a whistleblower in court, because they believe that will pollute their ability to pursue their case. This happened. They tried to do this to Thomas Drake, where they didn't want him. If he didn't go to trial, the case collapsed for the government. Fortunately for Thomas Drake, but had it gone to trial, what they wanted was that he could not talk about how he had gone to an inspector general and he had tried to bring this information. And so they'll want to do the same to Reality Winner and make sure that the defense can't talk about, all the actions she maybe had engaged in to raise her superior's awareness that she was concerned about information she was reading or whatever they have to present. And so I think it gets really difficult. And yeah, I think that if they do lose, I definitely would be looking for a effort to get a plea agreement, because it's a lot of time that they have to spend. There's a lot of money. She's not paying for this herself. She's raising money. I mean, we have to talk about, there's millions of dollars in legal fees that have to be paid here, court fees that have to be paid here. This isn't being done on the cheap. And the government winning their case, if they do, puts all of the costs on them to pay for. You have to pay for a judge. You have to pay for that judge's time trying that case and all of that, and the all of this stuff that goes on. This is a huge issue that they have to consider as they decide to proceed forward. And so if you don't think you can win during that trial, if she doesn't want to, I mean, maybe she wants to still go through with it and accept the outcome. But it's not like, it's not like Chelsea Manning. I don't think it's going to be where, you make a big statement, you say, this is what I did it, and this is why I did it, and then you go on and you've pled to some of it, but you haven't pled to all of it. There's no flexibility to really do that. I mean, the way that Chelsea decided to do that was, I think, an artful way to maintain some whistleblower bona fides at the same time that she was going to admit that she had committed crimes that she shouldn't committed. And also it was in preparation for the fact that she was going to have to apologize for what she did, even though deep down she believed that she was justified. But she had to apologize because she wanted to have a reduced sentence. So in Reality Winner's case, there's really no flexibility here. There's just no system that allows for her to both say why she did the thing she did, but then also atone during sentencing before a judge, say that she knows it was wrong, so that she can get the lowest possible sentence, which we know anybody who had self-interest would try to do, so that they weren't in jail for a long, long time. And I just think that this is a really critical motion. If they win it, it's a turning point. It's something that will make it very it's not impossible for the government to bring their case against Reality Winner, but they don't have that confession anymore. So they have to just use forensic evidence. And that's remarkable for the defense. The government might decide that there's a lot of resources, all kinds of other stuff that they have to manage, and so maybe they decide, we'll offer you a plea deal of so many months in jail if you take it, and we won't proceed to trial. And so there's a lot that can happen just with this motion to suppress, in my view.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And just, I think we should all pay attention to it just for the mere fact that, if this motion is denied, it really does open the door for the FBI and I assume any law enforcement to really kind of do whatever they can. Again, it puts the onus on you, the accused, to ask for your rights. You have to ask, am I under arrest? Should you Mirandize me? Can I leave? It's all on you. And obviously, you should always ask, if you're under arrest or stuff like that. But, not everyone does that. And, hindsight is 20/20. I'm sure there are a lot of people sitting at home right now saying, oh, well, I wouldn't do that if the cops came. You have no idea what it's like when, cops show up at your house asking you all sorts of questions. Especially, cops can legally lie to you. The FBI can lie to you. Which is funny when they say, don't lie to us, Winner, because that's going to be bad for you. But they're lying to her throughout this entire interrogation. Kevin, is there anything else? We're running out of time. We've got maybe about 10 minutes left or so. Is there anything else specifically on this case that you didn't get to cover that you want to mention? I mean, obviously I want to have you back on as soon as I can to discuss this. I mean, maybe even on the 27th, which will be a Tuesday. So maybe we could record a little live segment talking about the I assume the motion will take place early in the morning, but to see how that pans out. But is there anything else related to this that you think the listeners should be aware of?
Yeah. Oh, well, and I think there might be a possibility to record. It probably would be a shorter segment, but
for sure, yeah.
At 10 a.m. in the morning, and so unless we're still in court, there might be a potential for a live report just to let you know how things have developed. I still haven't. I will say, let's talk this a little bit about like from a media standpoint. This is probably where I think we could end, because it's not as significant as all of the legal issues that we've got into, but it's important to just note where things stand as far as the media goes. I think that this case has gone ignored by much of the press, which I'm slightly stunned, but also maybe it might be that the people who are involved in reporting are just so deep into things like the stupid Nunes memo and the Russia investigation and all this other stuff. But again, like we were talking, this kind of dovetails. Like you could, if you were a liberal Democrat, be a defender of Reality Winner and take up her case in the same way that they are wanting to see justice for all of these people that Mueller has issued indictments against, because now Donald Trump is prosecuting this person who released information about Russia allegedly interfering in our election infrastructure. And so you could get on board, but the media hasn't talked about this case. Media doesn't really cover legal cases, though, unless there's something sensational about them, like they're shooters. Did they go on a rampage? Did they massacre people? Larry Nassar, we got all the daily developments with what he was doing at Michigan State University and abusing the women, the girls there. But these kinds of cases like Chelsea Manning, even with all these like high profile developments, there were very few mainstream reporters who were going there, very few people from outlets like the New York Times or Washington Post going there to cover every day of the pretrial hearings, to cover these developments and to let people know even during the trial what was happening on a daily basis. You get people who cover the opening statements and then they report on a verdict, or they report on the sentencing verdict. And so you miss out. You don't see the process. You don't understand how the prosecutors aggressively pursue whistleblowers or leakers. And I think that's troubling, and so it's important for an independent journalist to be there. There's someone who can commit daily. You could come from an outlet like Newsweek or New York Times or whatever. You could come from any of these places as long as you're there daily. The Associated Press had someone who was doing daily reporting on the Chelsea Manning hearings. I thought that he did a decent job of at least letting people know what happened each day. But for whatever reason, they don't want to make the investment. And so it falls on people like myself and other outlets who find an interest in her case or find that they identify and sympathize with what she's going through, to get down there and give people a rundown on developments.
We're at the break right now, or the end right now, Kevin. Thank you so much for joining us. We will definitely get you back on the show again soon, hopefully on the 27th to talk about this motion. But anyway, you can find all of Kevin Gosztola's work at shadowproof.com. Kevin is on Twitter, and there's also a Patreon, so you can sign up to support Shadowproof. And I hope you all enjoyed this conversation, and I will be talking to you very soon. Thank you, Kevin.
rules. No rules. No taboo topics. No taboo topics. No fear of doom. No fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
Simply Clean Foods is dedicated to providing the best quality food you can buy next to fresh from a farmer's market. Our stringent quality controls and absolute zero GMOs plus testing for heavy metals makes us unique in the storable foods market. Our line of fruits, vegetables, and meats are suitable for everyday use, and you won't have to worry about throwing away valuable groceries ever again. Take out the amount you need and reseal the package for use within the next 6 months. Simply Clean Foods' primary focus is to bring clean food to people all around the world and change the way we look at freeze-dried food in our daily cooking. Go to simplycleanfoods.net. That's www.simplycleanfoods.net today.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
American Survival Wholesale is a proud sponsor of the American Freedom Radio. And when you purchase quality products from AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, you help support this program. Our quality non-GMO foods do not contain MSG, high fructose corn syrup, or heavy metals. At American Survival Wholesale, you can choose from over 8,000 quality products, including self-defense weapons, bug-out bags, and long-term storable food at wholesale prices. We also have custom food packs available, including gluten-free, dairy-free, and vegetarian packs. If we don't have it, you don't need it. American Survival Wholesale is a veteran-owned and operated company which also supports our veterans in need, and we are very active in disaster relief. If you would like to become a distributor, please email us at bugoutamerica@usa.com or call 818-720-0759. We offer free consultations to answer all your questions. Do it today while things are calm. That's AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com.
Assassination. You know what's interesting about assassination? Well, not only does it change those popularity polls in a big hurry, but it's also interesting to notice who it is we assassinate. Do you ever notice who it is? Stop to think of who it is we kill. It's always people who've told us to live together in harmony and try to love one another. Jesus, Gandhi, Lincoln, John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, John Lennon. They all said, try to live together peacefully. Bam! Right in the head. Apparently we're not ready for that. Yeah, that's difficult behavior for us. We're too busy sitting around trying to think up ways to kill each other. Here's one we came up with. It's efficient, too. Genocide, you know? Killing large numbers of people simply because they don't look like you, they don't talk like you, and they don't have the same kind of hats you do. You ever notice that anytime you see two groups of people who really hate each other, chances are good they're wearing different kind of hats. Keep an eye on that. It might be important.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control the all out. Control is good. 5. Roger copy. 3. 2. 1. Engage.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio.